trilateral meaning, think tanks from Europe, America, and Japan basically have a huge influence on world policy.
Yep.
This was started by Brzezinski, who was Carter's main brain man back in the 60s and 70s. Certain things have to be done in a certain order if we want to keep society going the way that it is going right now. How much energy will we need? How is the expanding population going to be kept? Fed, for example? Obama and Brown and this Anglo group, as you said, at the center of all this all, have got very good information, are probably very aware of the situation on our finite planet, and given the various possibilities to keep it going as usual, systems as usual, probably the best way to do it in the very near future is to have some kind of centralist government. Whether it's agreeable or not, or whether it is something that would help our evolution or not, is the million-dollar question. I don't think so. I want to ask you, the current state of our planet, our current population, our current challenges, are we moving towards a big shift or not?
I think it's got an exciting idea. I think we all watch movies like Avatar, which are, you know, if you want to get real conspiracy, you can say it's actually Hollywood trying to prime society ready for a shift. Well, there's been the whole idea of coming, I guess it all comes down to world population. That's like the big crux. Yeah. It comes down to world population, how much resources there are on the planet. And people have said for a long time that we're hitting a crunch point, and it never has happened. The reason is because we are developing technologies. Our farming is far superior, our energy production is cheaper, and land that may have been marginals now can be farmed, and genetic engineering of tomatoes gives you the flavor saver, and the shelf life is doubled on a tomato, which is huge because it's a staple food. So these crunches that have been predicted, I think probably since the 60s, and probably, I don't know, maybe hundreds of years people have been looking at it. If you're looking at the lines of population growth, you probably could have predicted it 150 years ago that might have been because there's going to be a problem. I know in South Africa, the whole of apartheid started because essentially the Afrikaners could see, even back in the 40s and 50s, that their numbers were going to dwindle, even though they weren't in the minority necessarily originally, well, they weren't in the minority, but they could see their numbers were going to dwindle compared to the Zulu-based tribes. So it's been known for a long time about population growth and the exponential growth, which especially started in the Anglo countries with Victorian times with big large families and all that. Whereas now that we're developed, we slow down to maybe even less than 2, maybe 2.3 children is no longer probably an appropriate phrase. We're probably at 1.4 children. We've got a declining population. So if you want to talk about world population catastrophes, I don't think we're there yet because we have got cheap energy. We still have got plenty of food in the world. We have problems with distribution at times in terms of certain countries, especially in Africa. But these are problems that can be overcome. We had a will and a way. No, pretty much guaranteed. And the whole global warming thing is actually counterproductive because the whole biofuel phenomenon, which is, oh, aren't we feeling better about driving our cars because it was from sugarcane or the like? Well, actual fact is doubled the price of sugar, taking away the land from these, subsistence farmers who are using it, and they are dying all over the place because they can't afford the food or even be allowed to use the land because their local corporations have taken their land. So the whole global warming thing has actually been killing people on a mass scale. Mm. Now the question of, okay, so we have problems with food distribution. Yes, there is a crisis in that sense. A global crisis, no, because we have plenty of food and we have plenty of energy and we're developing. And as we've all the peoples and the economists and the sociologists have seen that as you develop, you need less children. You don't need an insurance policy of having 6 sons who can farm for you when you're an old man. So people want to have a better lifestyle and kids cramp your style, essentially. I mean, we might have a kid or two, but that's how the West and most developed nations are going. So the trick would be to raise the living standard of people around the world. That is the way to slow down the population growth.
Very interesting, very interesting. The crisis has been talked about certainly since I was a young man. Oh, and by the time we get to the 70s and the 80s, we're going to blow each other apart. It was a nuclear threat at that point. And then the nuclear threat was superseded after the Cold War finished with, well, now it's global warming. There's always going to be something else. However, I want to get now to the sun, to the effect that the sun has on our weather, because in your data, which I looked over, you were inferring that the changes, that if we're seeing any changes right now, certainly have nothing to do with anthropogenic factors, but are completely natural.
Yep.
There was a declaration on the BBC Science website basically a couple of years ago saying it is now finally proven that the sun has no connection to our weather.
Pretty bold.
Which I thought was very, very bold. Now, when you were researching to do the Church of Global Warming, what did you find out about the sun and its relation to the Earth's weather?
Well, as I hinted previously, Sir William Herschel correlated, and correlation is not necessarily causation, I agree, but it's been well known that sunspot activity correlated to wheat prices. Well, there you go, the sun's warmer, the yields are higher, the prices are going to go down. You could see it 200 years ago. Sunspots have been quite accurately observed for about 300-400 years.
That's right.
And basically we've been warming up surprisingly for 300-400 years. And that's ever since the Maunder minimum, when the sunspots almost disappeared for a period of time. So since then, we have been coming out of a growth phase of temperature. So the global warming that we've been seeing is not 100 years old, it's probably 300 years old, let's say, and it's been pre-industrial and it's been going up. And then it's modulated, so it's not really rocket science to say, well, what's powering the planet is the energy coming into it, which is the sun. Suddenly blaming a little, very, very tiny factor of CO2 as somehow the major driver is quite a bold step. On top of course, the sun, we have a massive sump of energy on this planet. A huge sump of energy that is so large, it can take maybe 700 years for that actual equilibrium point to change, and that's the oceans.
The oceans.
So the oceans, you even say the oceans of memory. So if you could somehow trace the currents, you can say, well, this was perhaps the prevailing temperature 400 years ago. They have a memory of sorts, because it takes so long, they're so large, for just a surface exchange of energy to actually affect the whole body. So and there's lots of people out there, world's top finest climatologists, physicists who document and watch these phenomena and have been tracking it, and I showed in the movie that really it's the solar flares, which is the sunspots, and it is the ocean cycles. So the solar energy is the main driver of the system, but it can be modulated, it can be altered on a smaller scale through the oceans. And that is well documented and explains, funnily enough, the last, when we have observable, sort of high accuracy, shall we say, even though that's in question, high accuracy temperatures of the last 100 years, all the changes as it went up to the 40s and 50s, and then when we industrialized, funnily enough, after the post-war boom, temperature went down. So when the industrialization really kicked in, temperature went down. Then it went up up until 98, when there was a maximum, and that was, most people agree, is because of an El Nino, and it's been actually either level or gone down since then. Whereas global warming theory would say, wait a second, we're churning out the largest amounts of CO2 in our history, and for the last 10 years temperatures have been going down. Well, if you look at the fact that with the PDO, which is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, is just the fancy term for the oceans. The oceans have gone into a cool phase. That's why, it explains it. So if you look at the sunspots on the oceans and correlate that to temperature, it's really very accurate.
It's astonishing.
But they're being ignored.
It's astonishingly accurate data that is being totally ignored. So there is, in a sense, a conspiracy underway to convince us that the church is absolutely right. Why is it important for this message to get to a lot of people as quickly as possible from your message in the film?
I believe the Church of Global Warming gives us a message which is extremely important, because global economic policy, fiscal policy, is being decided for us